Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at an article that shows that the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, has said that trans women should not be automatically counted as women in terms of meeting diversity targets. This kind of affects mainly the sort of the board makeup of the top companies and the stock exchange listed companies on the FTSE and things like that. So it's a way that they can meet their diversity targets without getting rid of men. And they've said no. And this is good news for women who still now have a chance of actually making it to the top and breaking through the old boy network. Not that such a thing exists, you understand. Oh, no, these top companies, they don't have any kind of glass ceilings, they say. But then they also say that, old Higgins, he calls himself a lady these days. Yes, well, we'll keep him and count him as a lady. That'll be fine. No, not allowed to do that. So I shall put myself down in my corner and we will have a look at this article. Oh, and it's not one I'm going to get angry about today. You can't keep getting angry. Anyway, moving on. So here's the article. Trans women should not be automatically counted as female. The FCA rules watchdog drops plan to force city firms to include men who self-identify as women in female diversity targets, and quite right too. They should be counted as their biological sex. You could have firms that are, let's say, for example, construction industry, which is 95% men. I mean, you only have to look on building sites. You very rarely see a woman on a building site. You'll get the odd chippy. You get the odd structural engineer, but by far and away the largest group on a building site are men. And so it would be no surprise if in a construction company it would be men who made the board. And bear that in mind, because hundreds complained to the FCA over plans to include trans women in a female quota. Now there is the argument over a quota. It kind of smacks of helping women. Do women need help? It also smacks of some people will say, oh, she's only on the board because of the quota. She hasn't earned her right. Oh, there was men here who have served longer and are better qualified, but she got the job because of the quota. It's a legitimate argument. I'm not going to get into it. Here's not the time and place. I personally think there shouldn't be a quota. I do think that the firms should be made to publicise, should we say, the constituency of their board. And if it shames them, so be it. I worked for a construction industry for 30 years. 99% of the people who came through my office were men. We had a few women, and we even had within the company when we had one of our structural engineers was a woman. She actually ended up as our build manager. She was one of the most senior people in the company. No issue at all, and if she'd have stayed, she would have been board member. She'd have earned it. No one would have looked at her and said, oh, quota. But like I say, that's a different argument for a different time, and I don't want to get into it here. We want to look at this. Companies will now decide themselves on how to report female diversity levels. Under new rules, at least 40% of board members at firms must be female. Just mention that. But, and here's the nub. Trans women should not be automatically registered as women in female diversity quotas. Well, of course not. Because you're then giving a woman's job to a man. Hundreds complained to the FCA over plans to make it compulsory to include those self-identifying as women in female diversity targets for boards and senior management roles. The move is part of the FCA's wider comply or explain push for diversity, which will also demand that at least one board member be from an ethnic minority. Companies who fail to meet the requirements will be expected to explain why not. But a strong backlash on the trans issue forced the regulator to stand down, ultimately giving UK-listed companies the flexibility to decide how they report their female quotas, reports The Telegraph. Campaigners praised the move, announced on Wednesday, saying the FCA did not have the right to redefine what man and woman meant. That's right. By what they were saying, the FCA were effectively saying that their view is that a trans woman, i.e. a man, is a woman. They don't have the legal right to do that. They don't have the moral right to do that. They don't have the ethical right to do that. Stay in your lane, FCA. You concern yourself more with the governance of a company, not with redefining societal norms. And there's Maya Forstater, highly regarded on this channel, friend of the channel. I've had a conversation with her via Twitter. She's fantastic. She's one of your biggest allies, ladies. If you don't know who she is, please do find out. She represents a group called Sex Matters, and she sort of gathers people from all over the country into various action groups to fight the cancellation of women. And we're going to talk about her here. Maya Forstater, an executive director of the women's rights campaign group Sex Matters, said the FCA was wise to allow companies to report straightforwardly on the proportion of male and female members of its board, in line with the Equality Act and the Companies Act, and not to start requiring them to ask board members to declare that they have one of many fluid gender identities. It is not for the financial regulator to redefine what man and woman mean. I completely agree with you, Maya. Keep going there. Keep up the fight. The FCA itself, however, will continue to report its female quotas on a self-identification basis. It comes amid fierce debate over the issue of trans women in female spaces. There is no such thing as trans women in female spaces. What there is occasionally men invading female spaces. Women know this. Men know this. The only people who don't accept this are those mentally ill people, the trans women, or men in frocks. Under new FCA requirements, at least 40% of a company's board of directors must be female, including at least one at senior board level. But following a consultation, the quotas will no longer be forced to include men who are self-identifying as women. There's no such thing as self-identifying as a woman. You are a man. No, that's it. That's pretty much it. There were 540 responses from city firms, lobby groups and workers, with the overwhelming majority, 439, addressing the trans issue, with all but one wanting the wording dropped. Some argued that enforcing such a policy would clash with equalities legislation and could fail to recognise the underrepresentation of women based on sex. Quite right. If you can sit there and say, well, 40% of my board are women, and then you go and investigate this and you find that let's say there's 20 directors sitting around the board meeting and you're saying 40% of them are women, you'd expect 8 of them to be women. And you look and all 20 of them have got prostates. 8 of them are wearing frocks. Where are the women? There's no women there. How's that equality? Some also feared that targets based on self-identified gender could lead to more men by sex on boards, to the extent that they identify as women, undermining the stated purpose of the proposals to improve diversity. Indeed, it would actually reduce the number of women on a board. So they would bring in this law in to increase the number of women on a board, and the direct response would be fewer women. Great idea, guys. Keep going. And this is what happens when you allow morons to make policy. The FCA said they accept and agree with the representation that companies would benefit from having greater flexibility. They're walking this back. They're basically walking this back because they know they've cocked up. No pun intended. Companies will now be able to decide themselves whether they report based on sex or gender identity. Actually, no, this is where I disagree, and I think it's easily solvable. You don't ask the question about gender identity. You simply ask by sex, and you define the sex is not self-identifying by sex. You define the sex is quite simply by male or female at birth, or you could say biological male or biological female, and that's it. And if a biological man wearing his frock with his ribbon in his hair is sitting on that board, you count him as a man. It's not difficult. Under the updated listing rules, which come into force this month, diversity information must be included in a company's annual report, meaning the first such reports will be filed mid-next year. The requirement is aimed at increasing diversity in the typical male-dominated financial services industry, where only 34% of the board members at FTSE 350 companies are currently women. I think that's probably, honestly, I think that's pretty good. To reach board level, you've been in there a long time, and a lot of these men, the 60%ers, they will have been in there a long time. Let's say late 70s, early 80s, when they entered the workforce. It was a whole different ball game. They've risen up along with others. I think they've done well. They got up to the board, and then they've started bringing women on. And it would have been, in the late 70s, early 80s, it would have been 99% men. Women, you've got to a third now. I think that's all right. I'm not saying it's enough. Don't come hanging me. I don't think it's enough. I'm saying I think it's all right, considering the environment these guys came up in. They're now very old. They'll be dropping off, and more women will be entering at the bottom. But I think, given the time, when you think it's, let's say, 40 years from when these guys went in, 45 years, a working life, it was 100%, 99% male dominated. You've got a third now, but I bet if you looked at the figures, yes, it is rising, and I bet the rate at which it's rising will increase until you hit about the parity, or as close to parity. You may not, bumble along up and down, but you'll be within, I don't know, a standard deviation of parity within 10 years, because all these old boys will have retiring, falling off their perch. And I think it will happen. And I think that 40% target, if you can get to 40%, let's say within 5 years, and I think within 10 years, you'll be to 45 to 50. You'll be almost at parity. And like I say, it's going to take time. It'll be there, but you certainly don't need men putting skirts on and taking your jobs. That doesn't help. The new rules also dictate that there will be at least one board member from an ethnic minority background, with the term non-white dropped from the guidelines for being offensive. It's offensive to whites because they're said, well, why are we special? We're white. Why are you saying non-white? Why are you grouping everyone else as non-white? Are the whites like the pariahs here? But it's also offensive to non-whites because they go, well, hang on a minute. What do you mean non-white? Am I lesser than the whites? Oh, you're putting all the Chinese, the Asians, the Chinese are Asians, aren't they? You're putting all the Chinese, the South Asians, the Black Africans, the Black West Indians, the Black Americans, the Inuit, the Kalahari Bushmen. They're putting them all together. And they're actually not asking for a cut. Here's the thing, they're terminating, just an aside, and this is one of my tangents, they're asking for ethnic minority. Define ethnic. They haven't said white. I'm an Irishman. I'm a Northern Irish man, right? I'm from Belfast. Norn, Arn, right? That makes me an ethnic minority in England, because there's not many Norn-Irons in England. So I could be the board's ethnic minority. That's good, isn't it? Now, that's not what they're intending, of course, but strictly speaking and within the rules that they've brought in, do you see? This is what happens when morons make rules. Anyway, I shall take up and we'll round off this video. Yeah, I'm just thinking it's a win. Anyway, but we'll come up and talk about it. Right, well, I'd like to think that someone at the FCA had a bit of common sense. But that's not really what happened, is it? They were pushing for this because it's agenda. But the complaints they received, they put those papers out expecting, oh yes, what an excellent idea. And that's not what came back. And they realised that they couldn't go ahead with it. The pushback was so strong that they had to act as they have. And so they started to walk it back. But they tried to walk it back and make it look as though they were proactively walking it back and realised, oh, these silly rules, we won't bring these in, whoever, and then trying to write off that it was brought in by somebody else. No. You were trying to bring this in. You were trying to virtue signal that you were caring for the trans community. But it bit you on the arse. Anyway, ladies, it's a victory. Your board positions are assured. I ask only that you work hard and don't abuse them. Anyway, I shall round off the video now. One up to the home side. If you like what you see and hear on the channel, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Ring the bell for notifications of future output. Leave a like, leave a comment, and until next time, stay safe, stay well, and goodbye.